All right, ladies and gentlemen. Half of it's already being done. There's all kinds of great conversations going on around the room. But if what I'd like to do is hand the mic over to Lisa. A little bit of housekeeping. We'd like to probably get out of here a little after 6. And we are going to live stream. So as it was pointed out to me, it's probably better if there's specific questions to ask them with a microphone so our folks at home and tuning in can hear everything. So thank you, and thanks for moving up front.
So when we did this in Atlanta, we did can you hear me? Yeah, it's working? No? This better? Yeah. When we did this in Atlanta, we did the NFIT Summit, we did a few codes of conduct, which I'm just going to share today because it is a heated topic in some ways. We have some people who are really not happy about NFIT, and we have some people who are very happy about NFIT and eager for the transition period to be over. So we ask that obviously mute your cell phones, which you've probably done since yesterday, hopefully. Raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Wait for the moderator, which Lillian, can you pass the mic again, to acknowledge you before speaking. If you have questions, if you could limit them to a reasonable time. We only have an hour. We have asked a few people to share comments that we know some of the issues that the FDA was interested in hearing about. So we're going to ask them to speak first. If you could stay on topic, which is tube feeding, really, generally. The FDA is interested in tube feeding generally, not specific to NFIT, but it all does feed into NFIT discussion, really. I think that understanding NFIT is the goal, but to do that and to understand how NFIT will possibly impact your life and what unmet needs there are, FDA is interested in your experience. Please refrain from interrupting one another, side conversations or comments. Theatrics, please avoid theatrics. And with that, I think we have 3 people we've asked to speak specifically. Do you want me to? I don't know how you did the NFIT or the FDA meeting in May. Joy, would you just briefly summarize that meeting in May and what we're kind of thinking of as part 1 of this meeting, and this is kind of part 2 of that experience. But I wasn't there, so I can't speak to it.
Sure, I would be happy to speak to it. So the Feeding Tube Awareness Foundation and the Oley Foundation brought together about 10 patients, consumers, caregivers, to really provide a firsthand experience so FDA could learn a little bit more about tube feeding. We talked about everything from general challenges like clogging, many of the things you've heard about today, clogging, medication administration, equipment compatibility, all the way down to NFIT concerns, specifically dexterity issues, flow rate, many of the things you heard about earlier today. We had demonstrations. 2 people had blenders on site, and I think they were Blend Tech and Vitamix, and people blended what their meal was, and one woman actually sat there and fed in front of us and showed us how she did it and how she needed to slow things down if she was feeling full and things like that. So it really gave a nice opportunity even for folks from FDA to ask us questions. I was one of the people who was there. And I really appreciated it because I saw it as not just a single conversation, but the beginning of a dialogue. So I'm just incredibly impressed that 5 of you came today. Thank you for your work and your studies, and I just look forward to hearing from everybody.
So among the topics that FDA asked us to try to address today were venting and dexterity issues. Those are 2 of the things that they haven't had someone speak to them about, is my understanding. So we actually had an opportunity to approach the ALS community, thinking that dexterity and independence is an important issue for the ALS community. We weren't able to find a patient, but we do have a clinician here who works with ALS Foundation, correct, Regina?
From Columbia University Medical Center, we have an ALS center there.
So maybe...
We do have an ALSA-funded clinic there as well.
So maybe you could kind of represent that?
Sure. Right now?
That'd be great.
So I came with some concerns today. I had recently heard about the NFIT from our dietitian, who's relatively new to us, and I just thought, oh gosh, that sounds complicated, and everything's already complicated and difficult. But I was concerned about dexterity issues, thinking it might be, a lot of our patients, ALS being Lou Gehrig's disease, where people lose voluntary control of all of their muscles, and it depends. Everybody loses them at different rates, and different systems go. So just a little bit about ALS. I would say the vast majority, probably 90 to 95% of our patients with ALS obtain a PEG tube at some point. So we're talking pretty much gastrostomy, but almost everybody has one. If they don't, that was a very conscious choice not to, and to do the best on their own, but they tend to not do as well because they can't hydrate as well and get their meds and nutrition. And by the time patients are at end of life, almost every single one benefits from having the tube. So as such, one of my roles as the nurse practitioner there is to facilitate a lot of the tube placements and then the ordering of the supplies, and the dietitians can't order, so we work together and she recommends formulas and things like that for me. So, dexterity. And looking today, I saw the NFIT, and I actually was pleasantly surprised by how easy it was to, I thought, put together. The old system of having to jam in, most patients are syringe bolus fed. Then if that's not working for some reason or other, they will go to the gravity bags. That's a much lesser, maybe 7% of our population. And then lastly, if that's not working, they would go to a pump. And so all of these have slightly different pieces that go with them. But with the syringe bolus method, it requires you taking that catheter tip, the 60 cc syringe with a catheter tip, and kind of jamming it in. And as the PEG tubes get older and more rigid, then it becomes harder, and so there's issues there. And this just seemed very easy to me in terms of just turning pretty, and it didn't require much strength. Having said that, a lot of our patients don't have, they have people that are helping them to do the tube feedings, and so that's not so much of an issue. My big concern is accessibility to what they need. Already, as it is, there's a tremendous difficulty with finding and getting the 60 cc syringes, if you can imagine. So, and the people that have the biggest issue with this are in the beginning when I set them up, and I'm going to explain how it happens a little bit so you can see. And also people with poor resources, which might not be just money, but like support and people that can get these things for them and go online and research and figure out how to get them, etc. It's hard. But when I send a person to have a PEG placed, the next day I arrange for a visiting nurse to go into the home to re-instruct, etc. As it is right now, I have to send them off with some formula, and I have to give them the syringes because the visiting nurse agencies can't get these syringes for some reason. I have nowhere to get them from except for I've bought my own and I give them to the patients. And hopefully I've discussed and we've decided upon the decision to have the tube placed while they're there, because otherwise I have to see if someone can send them out to the person's home. So it's a big rigmarole. I've tried to get them from CVS and multiple other pharmacies. CVS does not carry them and cannot, with a prescription, cannot get them. So it's a problem. And then it depends on the situation, but our ALS patients, many times they are receiving their tube placement way before they're going to use it. And that is because of the fact that it's a procedure which requires varying levels of sedation, possibly twilight conscious sedation, which then weakens your muscles. You have to lie down flat. So if someone has breathing issues, it becomes very difficult, unsafe, and you reach a point where you can't do it. So it's far better to do it when their breathing status is good. So they may have a tube that they're just using, they're flushing once a day until they need it. The problem is enteral companies cannot give them syringes until they're on service with them, if you can imagine. So now I've got these people who aren't even getting supplies, who have no real ways of getting syringes. And now I'm thinking about the ENFit ones and how difficult. So I was thinking, perhaps if this becomes a requirement and everybody has to have this ENFit thing on the end, if that has to be, there has to be a way you can take it off in an emergency situation and put the other kind back on so you could give them food and fluids. Because I could see some people getting medically ill because they haven't been able to access their device. So that's my biggest fear.
Thank you. On the panel, the FDA, anybody?
Just before we came in earlier today, I went up to one of the companies and said, so I've heard that patients are having difficulty getting these from their distributors. Some of the patients are saying they're just randomly getting whatever they send. We saw a lot of studies on the difference in the tubes. There can be a difference between them. So I asked them, what do you do to get those? What if you want a specific tube? And they said, well, all you have to do is either contact the distributor, and if you're not getting that, contact the company, and they'll facilitate it. So I'm kind of wondering on your response to that, and if any of the companies are here that could help explain that situation a little more.
Sorry, I just walked in at the end. So I heard the main concern, one of the concerns you guys were having is you've got these patients, they're ALS patients, they're going to get their tube placed, and they go home and they don't have anything to flush their tube with, and they're not getting that syringe. And I work in home care. I cover nationwide. I've been doing it for 7 years, and I will say I see patients on a daily basis that get a tube placed and never get connected with the home care company, and they never even get a syringe. So my question is when they go to get their tube placed, they're the one placing the tube. Why aren't they taking the responsibility to provide the patient with a syringe? Why aren't they taking the time to provide the patient with the site care education, that basic information? Because I love it when I get this call, oh my gosh, Care, can you come over? I've got a patient that's been watching YouTube videos, and she got lucky enough to get like a 20-foot long, PEG tube, and it's just hanging out. And she's like, what do I do with this? Because, head and neck oncology patients, that's a very typical patient population. So I will say it doesn't matter what type of syringe or what type of tube they get placed, they're always going to have a problem with not getting those supplies from the source. So I always go, where do you send your patients to get their tube placed? And you want to have a trusted partner in that patient's care. I love going into outpatient clinics that place tubes and say, hey, what are you guys providing your patients? Are you giving them any education? Like, I call it the slam dunk, where they want to place the tube, send them out the door, and never see them again. But they have to realize that they have a problem and have to take over some ownership, where they need to provide the patient with the basic minimum for when they go home. And we have done a lot of different talk, I'm in a couple of different groups, and we talk about, if you place a pacemaker in a patient, you're going to give them an education booklet about their pacemaker. You're going to do a knee replacement. You're going to tell them what lot and what number that their knee replacement came from. But since it's a feeding tube, it's like a low and, it's a second-class citizen kind of situation. And so it's really being those advocates. And I would, if I worked in an outpatient clinic and control where I would send my patients, I would maybe be that crazy person that controlled the whole situation of where am I sending them, what tube are you placing. My biggest joy in home care was working out of this one hospital, and they were placing tubes that weren't great. We were having a lot of issues in the outpatient. They were suturing them, all this craziness. And then one day I went in as the home care dietitian at the time of placement, and they said, what tube do you want us to place today? And I was like, you're going to let me choose? And so being able to ask and have those questions and educate them and providing them, pulling in other vendors that made different tubes to be like, this is a better option. But being able to kind of control that, because I see it doesn't matter what type of tube you're placing, the patients are going to still have getting the products. And that Medicare limbo, if they're not ready to feed yet, what do we do? And so, yes, I do feel that we have to be able to buy these syringes on the internet, too. So that by prescription, I know you guys might have already talked about that already, but patients need to be able to go and buy them if they want to buy them themselves. Because I could order a half-tip syringe on Amazon Prime and have it in 24 hours. So even if I was at home, I could get it. So I would say that's my biggest takeaway on all of ENFIT is we need to be able to have patients be able to get the syringes. I was talking to a mom earlier who said, my compounding pharmacy will not provide any syringes, period, even today, much less in the future. And I said, well, they're providing you a prescription they're making money off of. You know, they need to be able to provide you with that, hopefully. So just kind of arming that world of how to be able to get those syringes from your pharmacy as well.
As a physician, I'm going to add a little bit to that because I send patients to get feeding tubes. And I agree with both of you. I think the patients need to come out of the procedure with a go-home kit. I mean, I had a Chemport put in 5 years ago, and I went home with a go-home kit. With here's your dressings, here's the this, here's the this. You know, I'll just take care of it for you, you know, accessing it. But I had supplies to go home with it. And they do not go home with supplies, and I think that really needs to be part of the standard. You put a feeding tube in, the patient needs to go home with at least one syringe, one or two sets of dressings. You know what they have in? Yeah, exactly. They need to be educated as to what's going on. Yeah, but it's not just the problem is these days, I send them in, the radiologist puts it in, the gastroenterologist. As you said, they never want to see them again. But we need to have a kit. Here it is, go home, here's your little cartoon instruction book or your printed out book, or here's your YouTube link to go do it. Here's at least one syringe. If you need tubing, here's a piece of tubing. I mean, we send dogs home from the vet with that, with more instructions than that on what you do.
I think I may have an answer to this. You're familiar with something called the Robertson-Patman Act? It kind of limits what institutions are allowed to do in terms of providing care in the home setting. I'm not saying it's a correct thing, but it's an area that I've encountered frustrations with. If I have a patient in the hospital and they're on a particular medication, a particular entity or specific treatment, I'm very limited in what I can give them to take to the home setting. Because the hospital has advantages in purchasing, they're able to purchase items with also through tax dollars, et cetera, through federal monies, et cetera. We get the advantage of that. And if we were to provide products or even sell products to the person, we are in competition with the retail settings outside. And we at Sloan Kettering have encountered many problems along those lines. Some cases we just had hell with it. We are the only ones that can do a certain item, and therefore we provide it. But you'll still encounter that there is a mandate that the public environment has to step up to the role. And I think that's one of the things we're going to have to press them on, is that I agree. So what we try to do at our place is bring in the home care before the patient goes home and do that transition and coordinate with the home care. And I think that is the ideal way to accomplish it. The person should not suddenly go home and then the home care person meet them. And I think that's where would be the best way to do it.
So I would say, so I would say, though, that that's the ideal scenario when it works and it's going to be used right away. But I will also say that when I get a new low-profile feeding tube, the manufacturer sends a kit. It has a syringe. It has a 35 ml syringe. It has a 10 ml syringe for the balloon. It has a an actual handbook for the patient that actually, they should be able to take the sticker from the actual tube kit, put it in the booklet so you know what size, diameter, all that stuff of your tube. They've never given it to me, and I'm a regular in interventional radiology, and I volunteer there. They know now when I come in, oh, Joy likes the syringe and the extension sets, but that's only because I've had 6.5 years with them, and they know me and they see my face on a regular basis. What I hope is that they're sending it home now with all of their low-profile tube consumers because they've learned from me, I hope, but I know that's not happening, and I know that I, as an ambassador for Oley, I feel like this is why Oley exists, because of these issues, because I can't tell you how many times I get a call from someone and they've been sent home with the tube. They don't know how to use it. Someone came to their house, didn't give them really good instructions. That happened to me, both with TPN and enteral nutrition. So I think it's wonderful that we're all here in the same room to talk about this because this is an ongoing issue. I think the person that might be missing from the room today might be the interventional radiologist, and maybe that means if there's one in the room, raise your hand. I hate to single you out, but okay, that shows we need to bring that into our group because I feel like that's a gap. And I have a really great one in Atlanta, and she came and spoke at our regional conference, but that's the exception to the rule. So,
Do we want to go on to the next invited questioner?
Well, did you want to say something, Tom?
Hang on.
We do have one other person to talk about dexterity
Yeah,
issues.
so the other comment, it was said among a few people, sorry, it's Tom Hancock from GETSA. The other comment was about syringes requiring an RX versus an over-the-counter. That is something that we are pursuing as an industry group to see if we can secure an over-the-counter designation. It does require some additional testing and work, but the FDA has agreed to at least consider and look at that testing to as long as we can demonstrate that the instructions are suitable without the supervision of a physician, then we might be able to get that clearance, so to speak. It's ultimately up to the manufacturer to pursue that, but we are working collaboratively to at least do the testing together to try to streamline that process to try to get it done as quickly as possible. So I won't say it's going to happen, but I will say that it's a possibility.
If you could use a mic, that would be appreciated because this is being streamed. I'm gonna bring a mic to you guys.
Sorry.
It's being streamed live, so people can't hear you unless you have a mic.
So no. So what Melinda just said was that we are working towards submission by manufacturers in the Q4 timeframe, and then it'll be a review period, and then there will be hopefully clearances shortly after that, so that sometime in 2018 you might expect to see syringes, ENFit tip syringes made available over the counter.
I just wanted to add to whomever this matters to, but this bit that the doctor from Sloan Kettering found about dripping is a huge problem. Can you imagine if you have liquid Roxanol in a tube, which is 20 milligrams of morphine per ml, and it drops on the floor? You may kill a dog if it comes along, because they love to lick everything up. But like seriously, that's a problem, and you don't know what they're getting necessarily. That concerned me. I can't even imagine.
I haven't actually, it's an interesting concept. I didn't even think about the poor puppy, yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah, those carpet stains are gonna be interesting. I don't know what the volume is. And actually somebody came up to me just now and offered me a contact to get some syringes. And I think that would be a great student project to find out just how much volume is lost in that setting. I think that would be a great idea. Also to get a perspective of what some of the issues there. Another issues we're going to have to start looking at is now that drugs will be administered with these particular devices. As you pointed out, the Toomey syringe with the catheter tip, that never was working for drugs. Drugs were actually something just drawn up temporarily in that, and it was immediately administered. If someone is going to draw up drugs or draw up anything in these syringes, now we have to keep in mind that it will be a storage device for a period of time. There's going to be a lock on that end of that syringe, and that's going to be distributed to a party and must exist for a certain period of time. I don't know if you heard about this, but not too long ago, BD ran into a problem with their syringes. And they found out that a number of drugs, when stored in their syringes, actually began to break down. My lab also picked up on a number of drugs where we actually picked up the plasticizer from the syringe was being accumulated. And then BD came back and said, oh, gee, somebody uses our syringes for drugs? Oops. And now we found out that the inside of those particular syringes have lubricants in them, and the lubricants also on the rubber and the phthalates come off. So now we're going to have to think about that. It's going to be some little food for thought.
I'm going to give the mic to Sanford. He had wanted to address the issue of dexterity.
I'm going to try to talk. I'm about to lose my voice. I had Tony throat cancer back in 2005, twice a day radiation for 7 weeks. So my tongue is completely numb, and my lower lip and jaw is also numb. So it's like walking out of the dentist's office after a half a dozen root canals to try to talk. But speaking of manual dexterity, I have extreme difficulty because of radiation damage with the fine motor movement in my left hand. Just last week, I went to a friend's house to pick some blueberries, and a daily skill as simple as picking a berry off of a bush is something that I can no longer do. I can carry the bucket with my left hand, but I had to do all of the berry picking with my right hand. And then, of course, things that would be affecting tubies on a daily basis is buttoning a button on your shirt collar. Sometimes it's worse than other times, and I have to get my wife to button my buttons. Now, from a standpoint of infant costing the government extra money, just think of the tens of thousands of tubies like David and myself that we are not patients. We are feeding tube users. And believe me, there is a tremendous difference between being a patient and being a user. I have no problem driving. I drove from Mobile up here, and last year to California. And, the last 4 conferences I've personally driven myself to, and I do all the driving because my wife cannot drive due to visual problems. But as far as the manual dexterity in the daily life of a tubie, the infant requires a precision twisting motion. Now, I know the lady back here said that she did not find it difficult. But if you only have one hand, I guarantee you'll find it difficult.
That's a very good point. And you know what, I was thinking more of force.
That's an excellent point. And I was thinking more of force, but you're talking more about the fine motor dexterity, which that maneuver of connecting the pieces and twisting would require more of. So that's an excellent point.
Right. And, when you're not a tubie, you don't think about those details. I'm 100% dependent on my little silicone tube. And as I was showing the people from the FDA, I have made all types of devices which I give to my friends because, like I said before, we have fallen between the cracks. The estimate of 500,000 or 300,000 tubies, the reason that gap is so big is because like here I am, almost 4 years, 100% tubie I haven't been to a GI doctor in almost 3 years. Why should I go? I don't have problems, you know. I had problems swallowing. I had tube inserted in 2013. That fixed that problem. So there's no need for me to be a patient. And, but again, the dexterity issues reaches into every portion of your life when you can no longer do things as simple as pushing a berry or buttoning a shirt. And this is why, you know, I have been fighting InFit for 3 years and will continue to fight it because I spent 26 years in the Navy. I retired as a command master chief. Only 1% of the people in any branch of the armed services can hold the position of E9 at any point in time. So I made it to that top percent. I'm not a nut, I'm not a toot, but I will fight to my death for my rights. And so, you know, I just want everybody to understand, I've been playing softball these past 3 years, but we're fixing to go into federal court on stopping InFit. And there's going to be lots of corporations losing big money.
I also had, go ahead.
What I wanted to say was the cases seem to be small in number of the people that were negatively impacted by mistakes of getting the tube feeding into the venous system. Perhaps there's other ways than this that you could address safety issues there. There has to be a different way because of how much money is going to be spent on all this and how much difficulty it's going to create for people. You know, people may even die because they can't get their medicine in because of their syringe, you know. I think it's a nice idea, but it is concerning.
Hi, so we don't have the ENFIT in our state really yet. I live rurally and over here, hi. And so we have the transition tubes, which are cracking, they fall apart. There's nothing worse than trying to have that piece that falls out of the extension tube and have formula and bile come pouring at you and the pump still going on. You have a kid that's, you know, trying to actively fight you to get that whole twisting motion. It is quite difficult, especially where it's wet and it's just gross. But that's a huge problem for us. And I feel like it's not going to just be for us, a lot of other parents of small children who have to have this twisting motion. It's not the same as where I could just kind of shove it in and let her go. Now it's much more difficult. We're also having a problem with, since we live rurally and there's that access to supplies problem that everyone else is having, we have motility testing done at Boston Children's. And it took us a long time to wait for that testing. That testing is extremely important. It means that we need to know what, through the testing, we'll find out what meds might work better for her, if a different tube is needed or more surgeries. We had to wait like 6 months to get in to have that test done. And during that time, that transition to ENFIT happened. And the test was no longer, we weren't able to like finish the test because Boston Children's had all the ENFIT connectors, and the ENFIT connectors were no longer compatible with the motility testing. So thankfully, since we come super prepared for every emergency, we were able to actually use our supplies from home instead of the supplies in the hospital. And the hospital was like, the nurse was trying really hard. She was like, we've had to use different syringes. If we take out the plungers, we can shove this into this and get this to happen. And it's kind of like the point of the ENFIT connector is supposed to help avoid these problems, but it's causing more problems, and these tests are really, really, really important. And I don't know how you can really address that other than not, you know, put things out there and say, you know, we're doing this transition here, and California's going to have all this transition, because now the rest of us are like, what are we doing? And, yeah, I think I addressed it all.
Thank you. Any comment from the panel?
I was going to ask a question about, is it a contrast issue? Why was the test not compatible with ENFIT?
So it's not the contrast. It's when the long tube that gets inserted to the patient, they need to then feed the patient. The only way to feed them is through that tube, and now that tube doesn't have an ENFIT connector. And the Christmas tree adapter that sometimes is on some of them won't actually fit into that anymore. Because the white one is no longer fitting where the red one fit.
So as far as my understanding is, there should be a transition connector for that situation, so it's interesting.
Your transition connector wasn't fitting. That was part of the problem.
Yeah.
The tube was too narrow.
The testing equipment is too small.
Interesting.
And it's all supposed to be like fitting with each other and compatible, because this worked with the red Christmas tree one, and we just thankfully happened to, oddly enough, have one with us and that fit, but the connector that someone was able to find at another part of the hospital was no longer fitting there. So I don't know, I'm hoping by now Boston has probably figured this out, but it was still something that we're there, we need this test, we need this information really badly, and, you know, it's taking forever and we can't feed her through it. And she can't eat by mouth, we can't do it another way, so it was just by pure luck that I actually had one with me.
Yeah, and these are the transition headaches that we would hope to avoid, but sometimes run into. Unfortunately, with the distribution, FDA is in the position to clear them as safe and effective or substantially equivalent to other things on the market, but we can't dictate you must sell it in different states and things like that. We're hoping that the demand would fuel a supply.
Yeah, I just think that you didn't really consider how much this was going to just impact, and not just like tube feeding. It impacts testing, it impacts a lot of different things.
Would anybody else anymore?
Connections for both sides. Yeah. Just another thing. I mean, I don't know how many patients, users are having issues with devices. If you are having issues with devices, you can contact the FDA. We can talk to you about how you can do that. If you're having product problems, or if you have any kind of injury from a device, we want to hear about that. We are listening. I mean, we can give you our email addresses. You can email us when you have a problem, and we can make sure that the right people are taking care of it. Supply is one of those things that we aren't in control of, but we are in control of when you do have problems with your devices, and we do want to hear about them. We're not necessarily always going to respond to you because it's not really, sometimes it's confidential. Sometimes we're doing things behind the scenes and you may not be aware, but when you speak to us, we are listening. We just may not always be responding.
I have a situation that is kind of related to that a little bit, and I know I spoke about this at the FDA meeting as an issue. There were 2 times this past spring where I brought my daughter into the emergency room, and she needed medications. The nurse brought them in with an ENFIT syringe, and we had not switched to ENFIT extensions. We still haven't, and they did not have any available for us to use. Luckily, I had thrown in a regular slip tip in my bag right before we left, and so we were able to transfer the medications to the legacy syringes, if you will. But since the FDA meeting, has there been any discussions about a new date in the future of when everyone will be transitioned so that we can avoid these issues and these fears? What if she has an emergency and we're out and I don't have a syringe? Like, is there a date, maybe like next year, 2 years from now, where everything will be switched over, or will that not happen? Will we live in a world where there's, two different ways, if you will?
Unfortunately, we don't have the pressure to demand that the switchover occurs. We can encourage it, and that's what we've done on our website, and that's what we're talking to manufacturers about doing. I think your voice helps a lot in that direction, and I'm hoping that induces the supply to start flowing into those areas. And I think that's the big hiccup at this point. I don't know if industry wants to add to any thoughts on that.
What can we do to make our voices louder and be heard? Any specific contacts that we should be reaching out to and saying, you know what, we're adjusting. We know that it's coming and it's going to be, adjustment period, but let's just get it done and over with and be done with this transition.
Well, Tom behind you is one person to start making requests from. I mean, a lot of this is sort of outside of our view. It's definitely within our concern. I mean, we want to make sure that patients are getting the devices that they want and may need in certain situations. So I think whoever is supplying devices, I don't know if there's really a feedback loop with them where you can actually say, hey, we're not getting the supplies that we need, or we're not getting compatible supplies. I mean, when you talk to your supplier, are they listening, or are they not getting the message?
When I talked to my DME when it was that monthly time to order for supplies, and I said, when are we going to switch over to ENFIT? They said, what's ENFIT? Right. They had no idea what ENFIT was. So I asked to be transferred to another person, and that person's like, I don't know what ENFIT is. So.
And I could speak to that as well. I'm over here. In advance of that FDA meeting, I wanted to transition to ENFIT so I could actually speak to the ENFIT experience of transitioning. I wasn't able to get the supplies through my home infusion company, so I went alternate routes to get them, ran out of those supplies about 2-3 weeks ago. In advance of this meeting, and I've continuously been asking my home care company when it's time to reorder, any movement on ENFIT. Have we gotten ENFIT in yet? At one point, they got syringes first, but no extension sets. So when I ran out of the extension sets that I had to go back to Legacy. For this meeting, though, I was told they would have ENFIT syringes and ENFIT extension sets. So I thought, okay, that's great. Now, I had my supplies shipped to a family member locally because I was going to be there before the conference. And I called that family member and said, hey, let's go through the box, because I'm sure many of you who travel know that what's supposed to be in there isn't always in there, and you need to bring stuff from home, which kind of defeats the purpose of sending it ahead. But anyway, that's another topic. Turns out ENFIT syringes were sent, no continuous feed extension sets were sent, and I knew to bring from home. But even though they're now available through my home care company, I'm not always getting them, and it's not consistent. And so if I wasn't coming to an Oley meeting and didn't have, contacts within the community, I could be struggling with feeding right now. So I just think it's important that y'all are aware that that's happening to consumers everywhere. Either their home care companies don't know about ENFIT, or they're aware of it and not sure when inventory is coming in. The challenge is, it's challenging for people to want to take accountability for it. I get it. You guys are in a position where you can recommend it, but it has to happen on the other side. Well, then manufacturers are making the product that's sitting in storerooms, and home care companies distributors have a bunch of inventory of Legacy, so they want to probably burn through that before they can go to the ENFIT. And so I think there's a lot of confusion. And just to hear from the community, for those of us who are ready for it, my biggest concern, I've tried to stay neutral on the whole issue. If there are safety and access issues, that's why I was grateful to hear the data today, because all along I'm like, show me the data. If there are safety and access issues, we should absolutely resolve it. But I needed to have some scientific information to document that. Now that we have some of that, granted it's not all inclusive, but it's a good start. where do we go from here? I mean, I think we have a lot of the right people in the room for a conversation, so I'd love to hear from others within the supply chain, so to speak, because the end users who are actually happy with it, to the extent of which I'm not feeding my pet anymore, yeah, I'm concerned a little bit about unintentional pullout. For me, I have a dog, and he gets excited when it comes time for dinner, and so he jumps up and down. That's the only time he jumps, but I am concerned about that issue, and I've shared that with folks, but all that to say is I'd love to hear from some other people if there's time.
I like to address one thing. I'm on a product evaluation committee at my institution, and we've been gearing up for the idea of ENFIT, and I can tell you also from our perspective, we've been trying to find the manufacturer. The manufacturer came to us and said, okay, we're all set, we're going to be doing this, but now we have to get rid of the old inventory. This inventory is not going to be thrown out. They want to use up that inventory. So as we're starting to work towards that end, finally we went to the nursing department and says, okay, we're going to be starting this implementation. Whoa, we have to train all the medical healthcare professionals. Most of the people, everybody in nursing now has to be trained in this sort of thing. It's going to be a little while. So as I understand it, in my own institution, we're going to be at least 6 months down the road before we are ready to take on the ENFIT, even if it was available.
I want to change the topic a little. I have asked a couple people to talk. One is Mary. Mary's going to talk about venting. She has specific procedure that she follows to be comfortable.
Yes, is it working? I spoke at the conference in Atlanta, and I brought everything with me, and I'm happy to say that one of the companies that is represented here today listened to what I had to say, and they have now made a drainage bag to be specifically used for venting. We'll see how it works. I will try it, and I will let you know if it's going to drain through the ENFIT connector or not. But I appreciate very much the fact that the trip I made was not in vain, that someone was listening. Now, on the other hand, I have asked numerous times at our hospital when I go to have my tube changed, what is happening with ENFIT? And they look at me and say, what's ENFIT? I've told you about it 4 years ago, but I'm not being listened to when it comes to the institution at all.
Their attitude is, we'll deal with it when we see it. Until we see it, we don't care. We've got what we got, and we'll continue to do with it. But they don't have any real knowledge, and this is interventional radiology, the people who put these things in, and they don't have any real knowledge, apparently, of what's going on in this area. And that there seems to be a lot of disconnect here with a lot of things, and I think there's going to be a lot more problems than just listening to people. There are going to be a lot of problems here that should have been anticipated.
And I think as we just transition, I think that was one of the most surprising findings of our trial, is that in the U.S., the majority of enteral and even parenteral nutrition is being serviced by small, providers who may be covering 1 or 2 patients a year. That's it. So I think that's the real scope of the problem, is getting all that information out to everybody. It's a big challenge.
Well, the hospital we're talking about is a large university hospital.
Never mind.
With co-located, as many university hospitals are, with a VA hospital across the street. And their attitude is, when we see it, we'll deal with it, but we don't know anything about it right now. The only thing they know about it is what we've told them about it.
What's going to happen in a situation like 2 years ago, I came to the conference and I got sick. Didn't happen to be my tube, but I wound up in the hospital up here in New York. If they have the infit and I don't, you know, what's going to happen?
I mean, in terms of that transition, I can speak for Mayo Clinic and Rochester. We've been at this for 2 years, and we meet almost once a month. Initially, we were meeting every other week, and down to the level of training nurses. You have to make education videos. It is a monumental task, and right now, you know, we've had to cover all bases. There are patients who show up with ENFit, you know, and we haven't fully made the transition, and so we just have a team that sits and you know, you get this call that this surgeon, you know, has a patient who has an ENFit tube, and we have specialists that go over and try to manage this. But you can just imagine what an undertaking it's been. Yeah.
Joy, relative to your comment about the dog, a lady in Australia just had that problem and pulled the tube out of her son's little baby's body, 2-year-old kid, about 2 weeks ago. I just saw that. ENFit was a noble idea. The rationale was to eliminate misconnections, but it doesn't do that. We still have misconnections. It fits perfectly into a neck trach. We subpoenaed some information from the FDA relative to misconnects for the last 11 years. 23 misconnects were reported. ENFit would not solve not one of them. So we wonder why we're going down this road to cause all this grief when it's not. We've still got misconnects. We still got things that misconnect into balloon dangler inflation tubes too. I just don't understand why we're doing this. I'm just not for it. I know some people are, and that's just my position. I'm not for ENFit. I never have to use one.
David, I think this crisis did start more in the hospital setting, especially if you're dealing with somebody who's very small in an incubator and they're bandaged all over. Understanding that that's an IV tube versus a jejunal feeding tube can be extremely difficult, and you've got 3 shifts and they've all got to get it right. So it's true that this change and wanting to get some order and some organization into it started in the hospital, and it's only lately that it's becoming a bigger issue because there are a lot of consumers on the outside doing some fairly unusual things. So I don't really think that you have to resent the fact that you're being asked to change. It's happening because there have been deaths from people getting infused incorrectly.
Hi there, my name is Jill Tolliver. I'm a dietitian with ThriveRx Home Infusion. Maybe as a solution, we could look at perhaps using the transition catheters as a non-RX item. I know they'll only be in the market briefly, and that's the role of them. We don't want those transition catheters in the market for very long because they're really a workaround, but maybe those could be a non-RX item, so parents who have a legacy tube could at least have their, you know, their safety device in their pocket to allow them to transition to ENFit in case of a hospitalization. Maybe those transition connectors could become a non-RX item for the time they're on the market, just to help during this transition time.
Is there anybody else who'd like to comment on the subject?
Or does FDA or anybody have any questions for the audience while you have them?
So one of the things that FDA has been mulling over for a few weeks is how to present this data. I mean, you saw just sort of a small little snippet of it. And so, I mean, it doesn't have to be right now, but maybe on the way out, you know, come talk to us, let us know how this data could be useful to you. I mean, do you want to see everything? Do you want to see a summary of it saying, 90% of the tubes, there's no effect, 10%, and these are what they are? Talk to us. We'd like to hear your opinion about that.
I just wanted to share one thing really quickly about self-educating or being out there and being that advocate to go back to your hospitals, go to your home cares. How do you talk about transition? Like you say, it's a major overtaking. So to plug a little guest to work, so there's a lot of different special task force that many people from different industries, home care, purchasing organizations, and a variety of people are helping to create these toolboxes and resources. So if a hospital's like, I don't know what the heck MFIT is, and how would I change? So there's going to be different tools where, for example, Valley Children's in California was one of the first hospitals that changed, and they were like, it was difficult but fairly easy. And so they are sharing tools and resources they'll talk to anybody, any hospital that wants to talk about it. How did they do it from all the way down to purchasing? What was their timeline? How did nursing change? And really just being out there sharing that these tools exist and how we can communicate. Because really, why do we need to reinvent the wheel at every single facility all across America when there might be some guidelines? Then if facility could go, okay, these will work for us, these won't work for us. Since I work in home care, we've had the joy of, we don't just get to say, oh, we carry this brand of feeding tube here. We get to say, we carry every feeding tube in America. And so I say I have a logistics and purchasing degree now because adding every single product. So, we get it in home care because then I've got to carry the infant that works for you and then works for you and works for you. So it's become a struggle in the world of home care to be able to add and carry both. So now we're having to carry legacy of everything, infant of everything, and having to pray that our main company that ships everything for us is going to be happy to carry both on the shelf or that they have space for people like that as well, because we're going to be in that limbo for a long time. But if you guys are looking for resources and tools to self-advocate and reach out, don't hesitate to blow up Gesda and get those resources and tools, because there's some really great tools that are being developed for you guys to be out there and helping share and spread the information. Because I feel like on a daily basis, I'm just saying this is what infant is. Let's educate, let's get those resources out.
I'll say, too, that Oley is interested in hearing what you have to say. We do talk to the FDA, we do talk to the manufacturers, we do talk to GEDSA, we do talk to the consumers, and the stories don't always trickle through. Sometimes you only get one side of it, sometimes you only get the other side of it. And if we can help in any way, we're here. And we want to thank everybody for this time. And
can I throw in one more question? To follow up on Josh's, we struggled a little bit presenting this data because we could do it in flow times, we could do it in time to feed, and so on. And one of our questions was not only how would you like it presented, but how fast do you really need to feed? When we had our patient engagement, one of the women had a low profile, and she said she really has to slow it down because it feeds too quickly. And then I've heard other people who bolus these things in. I've seen children fed with 7 60cc syringes in 6 minutes. And then we heard about the woman who was overinflating her stomach. So I was just wondering, do we have a sense of how long is too long to feed and how fast is too fast when we look at these numbers? Because we kind of broke them down into sections.
So I have somewhat of a sense because I have a number of patients on tube feeds. I would say that a good 30% of patients are feeding too fast. And what it does, some people can tolerate it, that's fine, but many people can't, and it causes just so many symptoms such as bloating and fullness and upset stomach, blah, 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 and even an inability to be able to get enough nutrition in them.
Does anybody want to talk about their specific time? You're looking for specific responses? We have just a couple minutes.
If we're doing a bolus feeding, my daughter can only tolerate 2 ounces at a time. That's using a 60 ml syringe, pushing with the plunger, not gravity. Gravity doesn't work for her. And it can take anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. If we go over that 60 mLs, she has reflux. There's been times where she's vomited or burps it back up. If we are doing a continuous with a pump, she can't handle a rate over 46 an hour, or I'm sorry, just a 46 in general. And she usually does about a 10 to 12 hour continuous feed overnight. So.
Do we have anybody else who wants to make a comment, ask a question?
I'll say thanks. FDA is here. I don't know when you're leaving, but my understanding is you'll sit as long as people want to approach you, and we have a silent auction at 7:30. Other than that, you guys can just chat.